Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The truth makes the police officer recoil in shock. The story of Jessica Morgan. Jessica Morgan had risen through the ranks with tenacity, discipline, and a rare elegance. The daughter of a schoolteacher and a former military man turned pastor, she grew up in a working-class neighborhood of Oakland, California, at the heart of the civil rights struggle. From an early age, she learned two fundamental things: that knowledge was a weapon, and that dignity was never negotiable. She had studied brilliantly at Stanford, despite the condescending looks, the barely veiled remarks of some professors, and the perpetual doubts her presence aroused in those who couldn't imagine a black woman excelling among the intellectual elite. But Jessica had never let herself be discouraged. Her ambition wasn't fueled by pride, but by a deep duty to represent those the system forgot. At 42, she had become the Chief Justice of the California State Court of Appeals. A first. A charismatic, respected black woman, feared in legal circles for the precision of her arguments and her unwavering rectitude, she embodied a form of justice that many no longer dared to hope for. Her decisions were cited in major legal journals, and her speeches resonated in universities like appeals to conscience. But that day, in that Los Angeles courtroom, she wasn't there as a judge. She was there as a victim. One victim among many, but a victim who refused to remain silent. It all began 3 weeks earlier, late on a Saturday afternoon. Jessica was leaving a conference on judicial reforms downtown. She was driving alone, relaxed, her favorite music playing in the background in her black luxury sedan, a car she had bought after her nomination as a symbol of a dream come true. As she entered an upscale residential neighborhood in Beverly Hills to visit a friend, she noticed the flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror. It's probably a misunderstanding, she thought at first, accustomed to the suspicious looks her appearance aroused in certain quarters. But what started out as a routine check quickly turned absurd. Officer Mark Reynolds, a large, white police officer, approached his car with calculated slowness. His gaze was cold, his tone sharp. "Your papers, madam. Does this vehicle belong to you?" Jessica immediately handed over her documents. Impeccable. In order. Her judge's card was even tucked into the pocket, clearly visible. But Reynolds paid no attention. He inspected the car insistently, asked Jessica to get out, searched her purse, and called in 2 more vehicles. As the residents began to emerge onto the sidewalks, she was subjected to 3 consecutive checkpoints, as if the absurdity had to be repeated to better assert itself. Jessica tried to stay calm. "Agent, I am the chief judge. There is no reason for this excessive scrutiny." But this simple statement seemed to provoke Reynolds. "And I am the President of the United States, ma'am. Don't move, or I'll handcuff you for restraint." And he did. He stopped him. Handcuffed to the hood of her own car, watched by passers-by, shocked or indifferent, Jessica experienced a moment of profound humiliation. Her rank, her degrees, her excellence, none of it had protected her black skin. She spent more than 4 hours at the station, without a clear explanation, before being released without an apology. The reason? A routine check. But for Jessica, this wasn't just a mistake. It was yet another example of how the system she loyally served could, in a second, turn against her. And that day, she swore that this time, she wouldn't stay silent. She mobilized her contacts, her legal team, and filed a complaint. She knew the price would be high: criticism, media attacks, attempts to discredit her, but she was no longer afraid. The courtroom was packed that morning. From the moment the doors opened, the benches were packed. Journalists, activists, law students, Jessica's former colleagues, members of Los Angeles's black community, all had come to witness this symbolic trial. There was a palpable, almost electric tension in the air, as if truth itself were holding its breath. Cameras were banned inside, but that didn't stop notebooks, pens, and keen eyes from following every gesture, every breath. Jessica Morgan entered, straight and dignified, dressed in a dark charcoal suit, sleek yet elegant. Her hair, pulled back in a bun, revealed her fine, firm features, marked by the ordeal but not weakened. She walked unhurriedly, each step echoing off the marble of the courtroom as a reminder of her quiet strength. Facing her, sitting in the dock, Officer Mark Reynolds avoided her gaze. He wore his uniform, like a symbol of authority. But today, it was his authority that was on trial. Judge Harold Stein, a man in his 60s with a piercing gaze behind his horn-rimmed glasses, watched the courtroom silently. A former civil rights activist, he knew the importance of this trial. And he knew that history was played out as much in the actions as in the looks. He made a slow, solemn gesture with his hand, inviting Jessica to speak. "Mrs. Morgan, start when you are ready." Jessica licked her lips lightly, then straightened up. "Thank you, Your Honor." She looked around the room, then back at Reynolds, and finally back at the jury. Her voice, calm and clear, echoed in the respectful silence. "I am here today to denounce an abuse of power, blatant discrimination, and violence that does not always speak its name." She took a breath, a brief, controlled pause, then continued. "On May 10th, while I was driving in my own neighborhood, in a vehicle I legally owned, Officer Reynolds stopped me for no valid reason. He questioned the legitimacy of my ownership, despite my proper paperwork, despite my professional card. He looked at me as if I were stealing something I had no right to own." A murmur ran through the room. Jessica continued, unperturbed. "That day, I wasn't Judge Morgan. I was a black woman in a nice car, and that, for him, was enough to justify suspicion. He asked me to get out of the vehicle. I complied. He searched me. I protested. He threatened me. Then he handcuffed me, in full view of everyone. No explanation. No listening. Just contempt." His gaze fell on the jury, then on the judge. "This isn't just a traffic stop. It's a racist act, a public humiliation that I cannot tolerate, especially coming from a man who is supposed to uphold the law. Because the law is not a weapon to humiliate. It is a bulwark against injustice." A silence fell. Not a breath. Not a movement. Jessica let the silence speak for her, let it permeate every corner of the room. Then she added, more quietly, but with a new intensity. "What I felt that day wasn't just humiliation. It was fear. Not for my reputation. Not for my career. But for my life. Because I knew that, in those circumstances, one misinterpreted word, one misunderstood gesture, and I could become just another name on a placard, a face on a poster. And I swore I would not be silent." Some people in the room held back tears. Others, fists clenched, contained their anger. Judge Stein bowed slightly. "Thank you, Mrs. Morgan." Officer Mark Reynolds sat in the dock, his arms crossed over his chest, his shoulders tense. His face seemed frozen in a cold expression, but his eyes betrayed growing agitation. Every word Jessica spoke further chipped away at the facade of control he was trying to maintain. Beside him, his defense attorney, Lawrence Bell, nervously flipped through his notes. When Jessica mentioned the fact that she hadn't been allowed access to a lawyer when she was arrested, Bell quickly intervened, his tone feigning reassurance. "Your Honor, we wish to emphasize that Officer Reynolds's intervention was strictly within the framework of standard procedures. According to the police station documents, there was no apparent violation of the complainant's rights. Any perception of discrimination is regrettable, but unintentional." Jessica's voice cut off the attempt at justification. "Rights are not a favor, Mr. Bell. They are a foundation. And when they are willfully ignored, it's not a misperception. It's institutionalized violence." A shudder ran through the room. Jessica then detailed the threatening tone Reynolds used during the stop. She spoke of how he raised his voice, treated her, suspiciously, as if she had to prove she deserved to be behind the wheel of her own car. She explained, still in a calm but firm tone, that when she took out her business card to indicate her position as a judge, Reynolds sneered and said, "You can print this off the internet." Then she recalled the exact moment she tried to call a lawyer from her phone. Reynolds snatched it from her hands. "He stopped me from calling anyone. As if my voice had no value. As if my identity, my humanity, didn't matter. These words, simple but powerful, triggered a heavy beat of silence. The tension became palpable, almost unbearable. Judge Stein looked up at Reynolds, as if to check on the defendant's condition. And suddenly the dam broke. Reynolds jumped to his feet. The chair behind him creaked loudly on the courtroom floor. His face was red, his breath coming in short bursts. He pointed a trembling finger at Jessica. "That's not true. She's lying. She's playing the victim because she's wearing a suit and has a title." The silence turned to shock. Nervous murmurs rose in the room. The judge rapped his gavel once. "Agent Reynolds, please remain seated." But Reynolds wasn't listening anymore. He had crossed a psychological threshold. Everything about his body language, his clenched fists, his furrowed brows, his set jaw, shouted of uncontrollable anger, a mixture of wounded pride and ill-concealed hatred. Jessica, however, didn't move. She stared at him, straight, without an ounce of fear. Her voice, calm but sharp, cut through the air. "The evidence is there. So are the witnesses. Your reaction only confirms what you deny." This was one provocation too many for a man incapable of accepting the truth. In an impulsive, brutal, almost unreal gesture, Reynolds rushed forward and, taking the few steps that separated him from the witness, raised his hand and violently slapped Jessica Morgan in front of the entire audience. A deathly silence fell over the room. Not a word. Not a breath. The moment seemed frozen, suspended between collective outrage and disbelief. The stunned spectators looked back and forth between Jessica Morgan and Agent Reynolds, as if their minds were still trying to comprehend what they had just seen. Jessica, struck but still standing, remained motionless for a few seconds. Her hand slowly brushed her reddened cheek, but she did not waver. Her gaze, dark, deep, burning with an icy light, fixed itself on that of her attacker. And her voice rose, clear, firm, merciless. "You just showed the world who you really are." His tone cut through the silence like a cleaver. No scream, no cry of vengeance, only a naked, brutal truth. The words weren't a defense, but a declaration of action. And it was they, more than the slap, that laid Reynolds bare. The murmurs began quietly, like a distant rumble. Then they grew louder. Several paralegals stood up in shock. A woman at the back of the room, distraught, dropped her bag. A law student, her eyes watering, stood up, whispering, "This is what we're fighting for." Judge Stein, pale with shock, violently struck the gavel on the wood of the desk. "Sit down immediately, Agent Reynolds. This act is a disgrace. A disgrace." He turned to the security guards. "Take him out. Take him into immediate custody." Reynolds, livid, stepped back. His expression was a mixture of panic, confusion, and suppressed fury. He stared at his own hands as if realizing, too late, the magnitude of the act he had just committed. Two officers approached, one handcuffed him, the other gently pushed him out of the room under the heated gaze of the crowd. Jessica, still in the center, didn't look away. Her face bore the marks of aggression, but her gaze held the marks of an earlier struggle. She inhaled slowly, then continued, with restrained intensity. "This slap, it's not just mine. It symbolizes years of contempt, violence, and daily humiliation. It's the hand of a system incapable of seeing the humanity behind difference. But I say it here, in front of all of you, it won't stop me. It won't stop us." She looked around the room. "This trial, this truth, these facts, are our weapon. Our voice. And in the face of history's silence, it is time to speak out louder than ever." Thunderous applause erupted, despite the judge's attempt to maintain order. The cries of support mingled with quiet tears. Jessica Morgan hadn't just won the courtroom, she'd just left her mark on the conscience of a nation. A few days later, the video of the assault, discreetly filmed by an assistant in the room, went viral on social media. It was broadcast on all the major networks. The country was in shock. Officer Mark Reynolds was immediately suspended. But the matter didn't end there. An internal investigation was launched, revealing a long history of racial harassment complaints, heavy-handed interventions, and falsified reports. Colleagues began to testify. Forgotten victims, silenced out of fear or weariness, returned to the media. The scandal took on national proportions. Fiery debates erupted on television. Protesters marched in front of police stations. Voices were raised in universities, in city halls, and even in the halls of Congress. And at the heart of this shockwave, one woman remained standing, silent but present. Jessica Morgan, far from posing as a martyr, continued to speak. Calm. Firm. Dignified. In a highly anticipated interview, live on a major national channel. The journalist asked him, "Ms. Morgan, after what you have been through, how do you still find the strength to continue?" Jessica stared into the camera, speaking not as a victim, but as a bearer of meaning. "I'm not looking for revenge," she replied, "that I seek justice. For myself. For those whose voices have been silenced. For those who have been ignored, humiliated, beaten, sometimes killed, without anyone speaking their names. And I do this, so that tomorrow will be different." She paused, then added, in a low but forceful tone. "The law can be a barrier or a bridge. I want to make it a bridge to equality. But it takes thousands of us to build it." And that evening, across the country, millions of viewers remained silent, touched, shocked. Because the truth, finally, had been spoken aloud.